Right, so let's kick things off. So thank you for coming. I was going to say it's almost a graveyard shift, but I think Mr. Spalton, you have the graveyard shift today, don't you? So it's been a long day, and good to have you here with me. So I'm going to talk about keeping research insights alive with a customer research repository. And I'm going to start with a story, which is probably a bit of a theme that's come through today. But before I do so, I've got two disclaimers. One, I've been suffering from a bit of man flu for the last 2 days, so if I cough and I'm a bit spluttery, that's why. But my main disclaimer is I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to say that all named characters and incidents portrayed in the following story are fictitious. Any similarity to actual persons, places, companies, or to actual events is purely coincidental. So our story starts with Niall. So Niall is a UX designer. And as a UX designer, Niall very much believes in keeping users and customers at the center of the design process, and really considering sort of customers, customer insights, customer needs when going about designing products and services. Niall joins a software company called Redgate. Like I say, purely coincidental. And as a new UX designer at Redgate, understandably, Niall wants to find out what do we know about our customers at Redgate. He's heard that Redgate carries out lots and lots of really great customer research, speaks to customers, goes to find out about their needs and about what they're asking for. But he's not really sure where to start. Like I say, he knows there's lots of research, but he's not, well, where can I find out more about this? Who do I speak to? And he's aware that often a lot of this information is in people's heads. It's not something that is so easily accessible. So, and he doesn't necessarily want to have to go around and speak to everyone in the company and try and extract that information. And speaking to a few people, he also learns that, well, this information, sometimes there's pockets of it, but it's spread out all over the place. Sometimes it might be in email attachments or on a drive somewhere or in a document or an old research report or other set of artifacts. So big build-up, because I'm quite proud of this slide. So Niall feels like a bit of a detective, a bit of Sherlock Holmes. You know, he's got to get. It's like there's a crime here. I've got to speak to lots of witnesses. I've got to collect some of the evidence, but I'm not quite sure who I need to speak to or where I might find this evidence. And not only does he have to do this with necessarily the team that he's working with, but it transpires within Redgate. Often the teams maybe don't share and talk and share the insights as much as maybe Niall would expect or would hope. So he has to go and speak to lots of different teams and try and extract this information, try and find out some of this research. And understandably, this makes Niall a bit sad. You see, because I think Niall likens this a little bit to treasure hunting. And so if you can imagine as if you're designing a product or you're thinking about to the customers, and there are lots of great customer insights out there, but these treasures, these real golden nuggets of insights are buried all over the place. So it's like sort of buried treasure, and and often even without a treasure map that kind of shows Niall, okay, so this is where this treasure might be buried. So Niall, he has a thought, he has an idea. It's not a particularly original idea, and I'm sure Niall's not the first one to have this thought. And he thinks, well, if you're unearthing treasure, so you found some buried treasure, what in days of old, maybe that would a pirate might claim that treasure and that bounty. But I guess nowadays, in this modern age, what happens to that treasure? What happens to the bounty that gets found? Just any what do people think? So this is I think it's like a picture of an archaeological dig, and so they're unearthing some of the some buried treasure, so to speak. So what happens to that treasure nowadays? Goes in a museum, exactly. So rather than keeping this treasure buried in the ground, it gets put in a museum where people can come and they can find out about this treasure. They can find out and explore and learn more. And they can really, it's making the treasure, the insight, these artifacts accessible. So, inspired by this purely fictitious, purely coincidental story, the DV DevOps solutions teams have started building our own museum. Not a physical museum, sadly, although maybe that will come, we'll see, but a digital museum. Now, at this point, I was going to play a fanfare, but sadly, the audio is not working, so I'll have to do it myself. So announcing, sorry, apologies for the world's worst fanfare. So we've started building out what at the moment is called the DV DevOps Customer Research Repository. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically a virtual museum for customer insights about DV DevOps customers. So the idea is this is really a one-stop shop for collating and making those insights accessible. And that's things like the research readouts that come out of the quarterly research readout meetings. Things like the personas that are being generated on the back of the insights. Jobs to be done, and some of the other customer insights. And I want to talk a little bit about the research repository, and in terms of some of the information available in there, and also how it's being made accessible. So, if you visit a big museum, and this is the Natural History Museum in London, that museum will typically be structured into different sections, galleries, and often even kind of different floors. And in the same way, the research repository, there's sort of different layers of that information. And I'm going to sort of look at what sort of information is in there and how that's structured and made accessible. So, and another way of looking at it, it's almost like a bit like a sort of an iceberg. So if you imagine, so we've got our kind of waterline here very often. So we've got sort of some of the high-level insights that are often seen. So things like personas and jobs to be done and maybe customer experience maps. And then underpinning that, some of the observations and the raw research data. And often what you'll see is just these top-level insights will be made accessible and shared. But actually, often it's a lot of that detail that goes underneath, which is also not only really valuable, but also often of interest sort of across the organization as well. So if we look at the insights, as I said, this is the real sort of golden treasure. The real sort of high-level insights that come out of the research. So the sort of things that we might articulate in personas or jobs to be done, or sort of customer experience maps around some of the high-level sort of customer needs. And at the moment, so obviously these are the sort of, at a very high level, these are communicated through things like the quarterly research readout, but also we're making those available through the customer research intranet. So things like the personas, the jobs to be done. And then underpinning the insights are the observations. So in a sense, these are a little bit like the nuggets that form those shiny sort of treasure. So things that, and I'll talk a little bit about what sort of observations these might include, but importantly, how the observations are tagged to make it possible to browse and filter and sort of explore and navigate those observations. So these are things like feedback that's come through from customer calls or visits or feature requests or usability issues. Could be any sort of customer insight and piece of information that's coming through. So it could be from sales, could be from support, could be from customer research activities. And at the moment, we're using Airtable to sort of store that, to store it in the and the associating metadata. And I'll sort of we'll see a quick demo of Airtable and how we're using that in a little bit. And then underpinning all that is the foundation of research data, I guess. So the building blocks of the customer insights, and this is things like the maybe notes that come out of customer calls or survey data. So again, sort of reflecting the differing kind of levels of information. So if we again think about almost like the Natural History Museum, the research data is the stuff that might be in the basement that only the academics and the real interested scientists are sort of going through. But this is the stuff which forms those higher observations and insights. So we've got this sort of research data which is synthesized and then creating sort of observations. And as I say, I'll show how that's done within Airtable in a bit. But importantly, those observations are tagged. So things like sort of time, where that observations could have come from, if it's related, for example, to a particular product, what sort of topic it's relating to. And then the themes around those help inform those high-level insights. So at the moment, the process for capturing looks a little bit like this, and I think this is something which we're still looking at, and I think there's still some work to be done around kind of not only sharing the load, but also speeding up some of the process. So around initially capturing those insights, so that might be, for example, following a call with a customer. So capturing the data around that, so for example, the notes around that, or sort of feedback that's come back from the customer. And then the details of those research activities we're logging within Airtable as well. So not only is there a record of the observations, but also who's been spoken to. So it's kind of where's that information come from. And then in terms of actually synthesizing and pulling out, well, what are these sort of nuggets of observations that are coming out of that, and what's that related to? So what sort of topics is that covering, and what some of the if it's related to a product, for example, and the process of doing that will really help inform evaluating some of those high-level insights as well. If we're seeing themes through this, does that mean, well, is there an unmet job to be done, for example, here, or is there an unmet need that we're not addressing? So I have let's hopefully should hopefully be able to see this. So I've got a little demo video of the observations within Airtable. Hands up, who's used Airtable, seen Airtable before? Cool, so a few people. I think Airtable's fantastic. It's a great tool. It's everything that Google Sheets should be, but isn't, because Google don't charge for it, I guess. So Airtable, it's a little bit like a spreadsheet, cross between a spreadsheet and a database, I guess. So in here, we've got some of the observations. So these sort of nuggets of sort of observations, and also details in terms of what some of the sources of that information, who we've spoken to, companies, and also brought out some of the things like feature requests as well. And you'll see these observations, they've been tagged as well. So we know things like so it's been tagged in terms of the kind of topic that it's covering, and also where it's come from in terms of the source. So if we start this video. So in terms of the kind of topic area and theme that it's covering. So for example, and also in product if it's related to a specific product as well. So on one hand, this is just a large sort of spreadsheet of information. And really the power comes with the way that you can easily filter and cross-link sort of within Airtable. So for example, here looking at, so these are where those observations have come from, so the different sort of sources of information. And looking at, if I pause it, so for example, in terms of information, so a short description of that sort of source, so whether it was a customer call, for example, or something that's posted on a forum, for what have you, and then a link to more information if that's available. So, for example, we could easily link through to the notes on Confluence. So it's kind of maintaining that link in terms of not just, well, this is what the information is, but also this is when we learnt about that, and this is where that kind of information has come from. This is what I mean in terms of the sort of raw data that's on there. And also, in terms of easily being able to sort of log and look at information across, for example, companies or teams. So looking at things like, you know, from the teams that we've spoken to, how many have use a shared or a dedicated model? How many have sort of cross-stack development teams? What sort of source control system are they using? So again, rather than having to kind of drill into 20 pages of notes or 20 different Confluence pages trying to work that out, just having a sort of a one place where we're keeping that information. So if we look at the observation, so for example, if we wanted to say, well, let's look at everything we've captured for a particular product, for example. So for something like SQL source control. So we can apply a filter, and it will show us all of the observations around SQL source control. And then we could say, well, let's look at, for a particular topic within that. So what are people fed back about something like pre- and post-deployment scripts, for example? So this is showing some of the tags that exist against that. So we look at pre- and post-deployment scripts. So rather than having to sort of plow through pages and pages of notes on Confluence or email records or what have you, we've already got a quick record in terms of this is what we've learned, this is what we found out about this particular topic from the research that we've gathered. So I think it's a nice way of being able to kind of slice and dice those insights and slice and dice that kind of data. So in terms of, so I think it's very much still kind of early days and seeing what these sort of tools and what this sort of a repository is really useful for. At the moment, it's very much just looking at kind of DV DevOps and primarily the sort of team up and Autobot, so the sort of source control and change automation teams. I think with the work that the Oracle team is starting to kick off, so we're looking to see, well, including some of that research sort of in there as well. And also, in terms of if you wanted to scale this out sort of across different domains and across different sort of research areas. Because at the moment, the tags and the taxonomy is very much geared around kind of DV DevOps. So that would mean, well, if we wanted to look at a more universal taxonomy or looking at something that was a bit more standardized. So obviously you don't want one team using one set of tags for their observations or their data, and another team using a very different set of tags. And also finding that right sort of balance around kind of self-support within the teams as well. So again, you don't necessarily want the whole onus to be on the designer or to always be sort of creating sort of tagging content, but equally if there's something to be done in the team in terms of establishing that that consensus in terms of, well, what is the process and what how should we be tagging this information and how should we be having a sort of a standardized sort of tags. So if you want to take a look, the dashboard is up on sort of Confluence in terms of the customer research space, and there's links there in terms of things like so there's a link to the bottom in terms of the data on Airtable, and then some of the other insights that are kept in there. So things like the jobs to be done and usability issues and that sort of thing. If you haven't already, I'd certainly recommend checking out Airtable. I think it's a really sort of great tool, and I think you can do some very quickly some really interesting stuff with it. Interestingly, and I wasn't even aware of this until we watched a video about a month ago, but we're doing something very similar, albeit on a grander scale and a nicer scale. So WeWork, if you're not familiar, I suppose they have managed offices or office space. So typically in big cities, so like in London, they've got a big office space, and they have within their user experience team, they've been building what they call Polaris to help collate and share insights. And they're typically, they're using it for things like audio and video. And it's sort of an in-house tool that they've built. But it's an interesting video if you've got sort of 20 minutes. And I think their ethos is around trying to democratize almost sort of research. So it's not something which is just sort of owned by the research team. It's very much something which is not only accessible, but also produced across the organization. So we've got a few minutes for questions, I think. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.